North Asia correspondent for The Australian. Will Glasgow back in Sydney briefly. So, Will, I'm sure you're keeping a close eye on these protests.
Sure.
What do you make of this? I mean, how rare is it to see this sort of public protest, given the ramifications for people in China?
Yeah, I mean, extremely rare. You see protests and have throughout the COVID pandemic online, right? Big, messages going viral or videos going viral before the censorship regime then clamps down on it. In-person protest is extremely rare. I mean, it does happen sometimes about, banks, when a state bank goes under or something like this, you get protesters around there, people who have lost money going there, appealing for the central government to help them against that institution. What's remarkable about this is it's a protest that's focused on the central government, and it's not, overnight it was in Beijing, the night before it was in Shanghai, the night before that it was in Urumqi, in Xinjiang. It's also been in cities across China, in Chongqing, in Chengdu, in Guangzhou, in Nanjing, in Xi'an. I mean, it's all across major cities in China. Now, the numbers of these protests, some are in the thousands, early thousands, some are in the hundreds. But like you said, people are doing this in person with their bodies, surrounded by police who are videotaping them. So with huge consequences as they do it. So it's extremely rare. People I spoke to say they've not seen anything like it since Tiananmen in 1989. Those huge student protests that were centred in Beijing, but were all across the country, and were only, stopped by a brutal, bloody, deadly crackdown by the police.
Okay, so I guess that's the question from here. Does China go down the Chinese Communist Party, the crackdown phase? I'm sure that will be a part of it regardless, but at the same time, perhaps ending COVID-0.
Well, yeah, look, one thing that we can be sure, well, I shouldn't say we can be sure about, things happen. Let's keep an open mind on all these things, but the Chinese Communist Party's response will be a crackdown, right? What that means about the COVID policy, we'll put that to a side, but whether they loosen or whether they tighten that COVID policy, there will be a swift crackdown. On Saturday night, this happened on a huge scale in Shanghai, and the police were watching. They were pretty calm with the protesters, but what they do early on in these stages is they watch and they gather and they try to listen and work out what are the sources of anger, right? And what they will be reporting back to Beijing, to the central government, is there is fury across particularly urban China about the COVID restrictions that are, complicating or stopping people earn their living and get on with their lives, and that they're going to have to find a way to deal with that. But last night in Beijing, again, you had them sort of surrounding the protesters, filming them surreptitiously. They'll now then pick people that they decide were the leaders, and they'll go after them. And so there'll be real high consequences for those people. They'll be blacklisted. They'll have maybe things written in their student file that they take to any employer saying that they were involved in these or they were subversive. And so Beijing will make sure there are consequences from this. The lesson they took from Tiananmen is never again, right? They could never allow national protests again because they get out of control. So the surveillance machine they've built over the last 30 years and are continually refining, I think you're going to see that rolled out from tonight in a pretty formidable way to try to stop this happening nationwide for a third night in China. But we'll just have to see.
Fascinating to see it. Facial recognition, we know how much that plays a part. Hey, just finally and briefly, as to Taiwan, interesting midterm elections there that suggest that the party that I guess is more hardline on the threat of China hasn't done so well. What do you read into this?
Well, yeah, so I've just come in from Taipei, right? And I think a lot of people watching this from outside of Taiwan look at it through that prism, the party that's got a reputation for being closer to China did well against the one that's more openly for Taiwanese independence, right? But these were local elections. They weren't a national presidential election. When I was in Taipei, I mean, the top issues quite seriously in the Taipei election were, who was going to be better for your dog, you know, who was going to open a new dog park in Taipei, and who was going to increase and improve the metro line, and, you know, who was going to improve urban toilets.
Right.
It's hyper-local politics, right? And this was really races between local politicians across Taiwan. So I wouldn't read too much into that. What we'll find out in a year's time at the presidential election in Taiwan, that will have huge international consequences. And in that one, there'll be nothing ambiguous about it. Was China an influence?
Good to get that perspective, Will. Thank you.